Good afternoon, everybody, and nice to be here. What I just wanted to say a little bit about is background to the role of the IPCC, some numbers about the kind of complaints that are being made, and something about how the complaint system is working and needs to work better going forward. So, as many of you will know, we were established as an independent body by the Police Reform Act in 2002, and that was a direct response to concerns the public had about how the police and indeed the PCA, our predecessor body, dealt with complaints, the feeling that it wasn't adequate. The intended outcome of the creation of the IPCC was to improve public confidence in being able to make a complaint about the police and how those complaints were dealt with. That is our statutory responsibility, to secure and maintain confidence in the system as the legislation requires. Our remit also includes soccer, HMRC and UK borders, which sometimes surprises people that we deal with serious matters in relation to those three organisations. But this afternoon I'm going to focus on the policing aspect of our work. Since we went operational in April 2004, which was before I went to the IPCC, since then, every year over the last 6 years, there has been a continuing trend of increase in demand on the complaint system as a whole and on us as an organisation. And I'll say a bit about that in a minute. I think one of the things that, given our name, the Independent Police Complaints Commission, there is a not unnatural misunderstanding that we deal with complaints. You might think that's what it is. We don't, in fact. And I'll say a bit about what I mean by that over the next couple of minutes. We have three broad roles. One is to investigate, and we deal with a relatively small number of the most serious complaints or incidents actually coming from referrals. They largely don't come from complaints from members of the public. They come from the fact that the legislation requires the police to refer matters to us. And I'll say a bit about that in a minute. We also have a large casework function, because every member of the public who makes a complaint to the police has an absolute right of appeal if they are dissatisfied about how their complaint is dealt with. And that is really a very significant proportion of the work we do. And then thirdly, our role, so investigations of a small number of serious matters, appeals against complaints where the public feel they haven't been dealt with properly. And thirdly, what is described as our guardianship role, and this is our role exercising responsibility for how the system as a whole works, and in particular, helping forces to deal with initial complaints better, helping the public understand what the role is, and hopefully ensuring that those who represent complainants feel that the system is working better. I can say a bit more about that aspect in the question and answer session if people want me to, but we're particularly keen to focus on learning. How do the police learn from mistakes? How do they learn from situations where they've handled things badly? And in order to reduce the likelihood of that happening again. Enormously challenging thing to do, as many of you will know. But for example, a week ago, we published a 10-year study of deaths in custody and deaths following police contact, where there's all sorts of learning to identify from cases where people have died in circumstances where different actions could have avoided that, or at least reduced the likelihood. How our work comes to us, as I say, is three broad areas. And I'll just say a little bit about the numbers. The first thing is that people can make their direct complaint to us. So a member of the public can ring up, email, and write to us. They can't at the moment complain by text, but they may be able to in future. But we have, of the 30,000 or so complaints that are made every year about the police, about half of those come directly to us. We have a telephone call centre that deals with them. And those numbers have been going up, and you can see from the blue bar charts the number of direct complaints that have been made to us over the years. And more recently, we have been trying to advise the public to make their complaint initially directly to the police rather than through us. And that's having some effect. And our aim is to get that happening better, because we think that's a better way of handling it. The second way that we deal with work is the appeals, as I mentioned. And you can see again from those bar charts, the number of appeals is growing every year, and I don't anticipate that going down at the moment. And this suggests that the police may have got it wrong the first time, and then when the person complained, they got it wrong again. And then the person comes to us on an appeal. Now, of course, within that group, there are some people who are never going to be satisfied whatever any of us do, and then they complain about us. And some of them go on to judicially review us, which is the only formal process they have after us. So within that group, there are some where it's unlikely that whatever the police did and whatever we did, those people would be dissatisfied. But they are a relatively small proportion of the total. And there's a lot in here. We uphold more complaints than we ought to, more appeals, I should say, than we ought to, because the police got it wrong first time. A simple thing is arguments about whether to record the complaint or not, which seems to me to be one that's quite straightforward, and yet we still uphold a huge number of appeals against the police failure to record. And again, that might be something people want to ask me about. Those of you who are familiar with the system may have comments there. And then finally, the other area that work comes to us is through the referral process. This is the statute, the legislation sets out what situations the police must refer to us. So when someone dies or is seriously injured, they must make a referral to us. And again, those have been going up, but at a slower rate, thankfully. And I think we're at the point probably where we're now getting routinely the referrals at around 2,500 a year. And they are the most serious, and they're the ones that we undertake our investigations from. And we are doing more and more independent investigations each year. Not because there's much more serious behaviour in larger numbers, but because we think that's the right thing for us to do now as an organisation that's well established. We think it's important that we do take on more of those independently. What we did about 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago, was, I'm just going to close that down so that we can not get distracted. We decided to undertake a review of how the complaint system was working and ask ourselves the question, 5 years on from the legislation, are we doing what Parliament and the public wanted us to do? We, the IPCC, but we, the complaint system as a whole, what's working well and what needs to be changed or improved? And we did that through consultation with all the police stakeholders and also with community stakeholders. And out of that, we got a number of proposals that we made for changing and improving the system. There was a very strong measure of support, common support from both the police and the community stakeholders about how the system didn't work well, and I'll say a word or two about that. One of the things that is a weakness is the definition of a complaint, because the legislation defines very specifically what a complaint is. And I'll just read it very briefly to you. A complaint is about the conduct of a person serving with the police made by a member of the public or someone acting on their behalf. So it isn't about the service failure by the organisation. It is about misconduct by this person who came to my house or arrested me or I asked for help and didn't get it. It's about misconduct of an individual. And yet many of the complaints that are made are actually about failure by the organisation to respond to the individual's need. And that really creates a limitation on the system. The second thing is that the Police Reform Act built in a lot of safeguards for both the police and for the public when it was created. But actually those safeguards have turned into bureaucratic and absolutely pointless procedures that need to be followed. If I give you a small example, a member of the public rings my staff this afternoon to make a complaint about Simon.